to another episode of our weekly Torah discussion podcast, Sephardic U presents. I'm Nathaniel, and joining me as always is Sam Bendayan. How's it going, Sam?
Hey Nathaniel, I'm excited for today's Parasha Vayakhel. Lots to talk about: community, leadership, and the Mishkan.
Absolutely. We've already read the Parasha, and now it's time to dive into some of the key themes and lessons we can take away. This week is all about building together, whether it's the Mishkan or the communities we're part of today.
Definitely. Let's get into it.
All right, so in this Parashat Vayakhel, we see a lot of emphasis on the community effort involved in building the Mishkan. But there's something interesting right from the start. Before we even get to the construction itself, we have a reminder about Shabbat. The Parasha begins with an explicit call to observe Shabbat before getting to work on the Mishkan. So with our live audience, anybody else who's listening to this, why do you think the Torah places such a strong emphasis on Shabbat right before discussing such an intense building project? What's the connection between
because
Shabbat?
the laws of Shabbat are caught up in the process of the Tabernacle.
How so?
The 39 labors,
Okay.
Talmudically, are derived from the labors that went into the Tabernacle.
That's excellent, James. Anybody else want to add to that?
No, the people are so eager to start the construction of the sanctuary that there is a warning. Shabbat is proeminent, it's preeminent.
Mm-hmm.
So do not think that because you are going to build a sanctuary devoted to God that you should to forget about Shabbat.
Yeah. Also great. Thank you, Dina.
Yeah.
How about Rafa? You had said something.
Yeah, I was saying, I agree with him. And I think the Chazal made a mnemonic to remember how many melachot, those works there are. And they used the gematria of Elah, where the letters add up to 36 to remind you there's 36 melachot.
Beautiful.
It's 39, I think, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting. I think that it's what Madame said was very interesting, which is that many times religious people especially become zealous and they kind of go too far on certain things. And so even before it starts talking about the building of the Mishkan, which is the type of task that people would get all, kind of excited over. And, there's a warning to say, this is fine, but don't take it too far. You have to maintain the balance and everything. And it shows really how important the Shabbat is. And not even this task was going to override the Shabbat. It's almost like something of a that keeps balance in the universe. Almost, it seems. So the importance of it is really amazing.
Well, it's interesting I'm sorry. Go on.
I wanted to point out that the Parasha Vayakhel, in Parasha Kitisa, the same word is used when the congregation asks for Aharon to build the Aron. In here, in the Torah, there is always balance. Vayakhel, in Kitisa, it is to do the Egel. In here, this new Parasha, Vayakhel, is to do the sanctuary. We are trying to erase the mistake by now dedicating the same words are used. In Kitisa, Vayakhel, and the people gathered against Moshe Rabbeinu and asked Aharon to build Egel. In here, Moshe Rabbeinu is in command, and he is commanding the people, he gathered the people to build the sanctuary. It is like to bring balance to the mistake of Aharon. Moshe
Great
Rabbeinu
observation.
I think.
Yeah,
Another connection between Shabbat and the tabernacle. The tabernacle is a sanctuary in space. The Shabbat is a sanctuary in time.
Time. Yeah, that's very
Beautiful.
interesting.
Beautiful.
This is-
So I love and Kitisa being last week's Parsha. So
Right.
it's interesting how the Torah sets this tone, right? Before diving into action, there's this pause to rest, reflect, even realign ourselves. And this reminder about Shabbat comes right before we get into the details of the work, almost as if to say, yes, build, create, contribute, but don't forget to take a moment to rest and recalibrate.
Right. And the real, if you look at the importance behind it, it cannot be overstated. But what really, why is it so important? And you have to think that if you can't take a break of 1 day in 7, it means you're working 7 days out of 7, which means you're working 100% of the time, which means you are a slave to whatever it is you're working on. And so even in the case of the Mishkan, the principle of freedom, of not enslaving yourself, takes precedence even over that.
That's a good point.
Very good.
One of the things that comes to mind, they're so excited about this project, right? This building, this structure, to the point where they're all going to give an overabundance of donations in gold, etc. I can't help but think they still need this physical thing to pray to. We just did the golden calf, and it's incredible or incredulous to me that they still need this object. And I don't know, it's just a thought. It just came across my mind.
Yeah, even more astonishing than that is, what exactly is the difference between building the golden calf and the Mishkan?
That's overlaid in gold.
Right. A critic could say, well, you know what? They're just doing the same thing. It's just that God didn't want any competition, right?
And now it's cherubim.
And they're doing the same thing. But what does it show you? It shows you the importance of intent and of your mindset when you're doing something.
Good.
And there's something that I always tell my kids. I give them this scenario, like there's 2 people praying in a temple, and one of them likes to pray because he likes to use his religion to think himself superior, and he likes to use it as a club to beat other people over the head with it and say, I'm better than you are, right? And the person next to him might be, some recovering homeless drug addict who didn't know what to do with his life, and he just couldn't stand his current life. He didn't know what to do, so he just walked into a temple and started praying. Here are 2 people doing exactly the same thing. Okay, one of them is right, the other one is wrong. And this is for us to guard against. When we become religious and we start doing mitzvot, we start to think that we're somehow, superior, or we're better, or whatever the case might be. And no, we're here to do a mission, and we can never forget that mission. And if you start thinking that you can fool Hashem by doing little technical mitzvot, and that it doesn't matter what your intent is, and
it has to come from the heart.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And if it doesn't, the whole thing is spoiled, and that's the difference between the golden calf and the Mishkan.
The Haftorah that's read at around Tisha B'Av, which is Isaiah 1:1 through Isaiah 2:4, I think, talks a lot about this. Immediately opens with,
absolutely,
you're doing the sacrifices as I have scheduled them, but you're not doing it with the proper intent.
Right, and it has very strong language.
And you're not doing justice to each other.
Yeah,
and it says, I'm not looking for the fat of bulls or rams. Who asked you to come here and trample all my courts? I cannot stand your festivals and new moons.
Isaiah is the most flowery language.
Right.
He uses. So
Ines?
let's move on. Let's talk about the Mishkan itself. This wasn't a project led by just one or two people, right? It's a community effort where everyone played a role in building the tabernacle and bringing what they could, whether it was materials or skills or just their presence. The community really invests in this. So what do you think this teaches us about community today? How can we better involve ourselves in the community we're part of? And how do we balance our individual contributions to a bigger project, to a collective good?
Maybe that's what the Haftarah is the Parasha is teaching us, to come back to the basics.
Yeah, because we've already talked about building the Mishkan, right? And I think in Terumah and the following Parashat. So here we are again with an entire thing dedicated to the Mishkan building.
This time it is back to business.
Mm-hmm.
The covenant has been renewed, and now it is really back to business, and therefore there is all this structure.
I like that.
And it is highly detailed to show us at the same time how huge the task was and how it is going to be accomplished, because the people start building the Mishkan the day after Yom Kippur, on the 11th of Tishri, and they will finish this huge task in 4 months. By the time of Kislev, they have already finished. There is such enthusiasm.
And a side note of this, I'm sorry, Sam. A side note of this is that, Jews have there's a terrible stigma that we're tight with money, etc. But if you look in the United States, Jews are way out of proportion for donations to causes, to schools, to this. They give a lot more than the second, third, and fourth, I think, combined. And we're only 2% of the population. And here you see, kind of in our DNA, in these ancient times, Moses had to step in, intervene, and say, stop, no more donations. We've got enough here. It's amazing what happens when we get our minds behind something, the strength that we have united.
That reminds me of when Diana said, she mentioned in the previous Parasha, how the Mishkan was built with joy and involuntary service, whereas the temple, Solomon's temple, was built with slave labor, and how the contrast is so stark.
And great insights. Go on, James.
And that theme of unity ties back to Purim with the 3-day fast. In the Megillah, the entire Jewish people were united in fasting so that Esther could succeed.
Very good observation.
If that level of strength comes from the Jewish people being united in not doing something, not eating, what level of strength could we achieve united in actually doing something, and that is the Mishkan?
Excellent.
Very nice.
And I guess one of the questions here, which you kind of touched on, Nathaniel, was we just got through a full set of instructions a couple of weeks ago to build the Mishkan, and here we go again, and it repeats the instructions. So I believe what's going on here is at this point they're actually building it, right? Where before it was the instruction.
Right.
Yeah, this is the blueprint.
Right. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Absent from the instruction of the Mishkan are the cherubim. They are not mentioned. Because it was such a sore point with Moshe Rabbeinu that as you read, you go through the instruction of the building of the sanctuary, the cherubim are not mentioned.
In this one?
Yes. If you pay attention, the cherubim are not mentioned.
In the first one, you mean?
In Parashat. in Vayakhel, as he is telling them how everything, the detail, the curtains, the aron, the plated, even how the threads are going to be made. There is the scarlet with the gold, the blue with the gold, the argaman with the gold. And when it comes to the cherubim, they are not mentioned at all.
But they are
the
mentioned.
cherubim were mentioned.
I'm
They're
sorry?
mentioned in the cloth.
But not in here. He does not, the Aaron, when he builds the Aaron and he gives the direction.
You're talking about the gold ones.
Right.
No, okay, we're talking about the ones that were woven into the walls.
But on the Aaron HaKodesh, the cherubim he does not mention them.
Yeah, you're right.
This time. And the rabbi said it was because Moshe Rabbeinu was afraid that shortly after the Egel, how can you say that? Some people would say, you told us we were punished for the Egel, now we are talking about the cherubim. So he does not mention it. Bezalel and Oholiab know that they are going to do it, but not the people. He passes it under silence.
So an interesting question is were those cherubim mentioned in Terumah a couple of weeks ago in the instructions?
Yeah,
they are mentioned. So this,
remember, all in one piece, looking down.
Right, but not in this parasha.
What's interesting then is this brings back something I mentioned a couple times before, which is that in very ancient civilizations there was a style of writing which was very repetitive, and they would repeat the details over and over, and the purpose was so you could match it with the original instruction. Because you might just say, why didn't Vayakhel just say, so, they built the Mishkan according to the instructions. Done. Right? No, it went and it put all the details in there to confirm explicitly that this is what they did, and it doesn't necessarily match the instructions given 2 weeks ago. So that's the purpose. A lot of people make fun of how repetitive the Torah is. This is one of the reasons why.
Oh, we're so stubborn.
It was very important. I'm sorry. It was important to describe the sanctuary because they needed something tangible. So these are the details. It is again to counterbalance the Egel that just came out. It just popped out. In here, no, it is not going to pop out. You are going to put sweat and tears and labor. Which is why it is so elaborate. But the cherubim are missing in here. If you pay attention to the text, he does not mention the cherubim on the Holy Ark.
The gold ones, just the woven ones. So I think of the design of this. Realize we're in the desert or the wilderness, right? So I'm assuming I picture this sandy, light brown, and then you have these vivid colors, the crimson, the purple, the blue wool twisted. It must look like just a bold print in the middle of this barren desert is what I picture. It's just an amazing, and then the glistening gold and copper and silver. It must have been beautiful to look at. So especially with the sun hitting it. So
and I wonder why those three colors, right? It was always mentioning the same three colors.
I think it's probably easier access to them.
No, they were expensive.
No, because the blue was very rare.
They were very expensive, but remember the mask of Tutankhamen, how magnificent it is.
Yeah.
With this deep blue, the ochres, they are used to those colors. Yeah. Let us not forget that they have been in Egypt for 250 years. They have learned the skills and the modes of Egypt, which was at this time a world power.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, let's zoom in on the leadership now. The construction of the Mishkan wasn't just about who had the best skills. It was about leaders as well. You have Bezalel, you have Oholiab, and they're not the types that just give orders. They inspired their workers. They got people involved. They encouraged them to share their talents, and they created what I picture like in an environment where everyone felt like they were part of something much bigger than themselves. So here's a question: what, judging from this or learning from this, what makes a good leader in your eyes? Is it the ability to delegate, or is it the ability to inspire, or something else entirely? What do we learn from these two? Bezalel and Oholiab.
Well, I think, one thing we see definitely is the vision is there, right? The vision, in this case, coming from Hashem, right? The vision and the instructions.
It's a blueprint.
Right. So first of all, it's a very clear vision that you have to have. It's got to come from somewhere, right? If the leader gets it from somewhere else, or he has it himself, whatever the case might be, you need that in order to have leadership. So that's one thing. And the other thing that's interesting here is that it doesn't say that Hashem gave Bezalel instructions, right? It says that he filled him with a spirit of wisdom.
Oh, I love that.
This is a very different thing, right? This is not, he's not looking at a piece of paper and blindly following instructions. He became something different, right? He has a spirit of wisdom. And so you can imagine him just getting all these ideas and solving all these problems, and
that's the inspiration to the others.
Yeah, exactly. The other people saw that and they're like, wow. And so the spirit of wisdom is contagious, whereas simple written instructions are not, right? It's just instructions.
Excellent point.
And then several generations later, when God asks Solomon what he wants, what, if anything, he could give him that he believed would make him a great king, Solomon says wisdom.
Very good.
And God rewards him not just with wisdom, but also with wealth and the building of the temple, because that was the right answer.
Right, because why was it the right answer? Because it was wisdom in order to lead your people. Right? Because a real leader takes his task seriously. And the task is so huge that he got scared. And he's like, you know what? I need help. Give me wisdom to do this, because I want to be a good leader. So he wasn't asking for himself. And then Hashem said, because you didn't ask for yourself, I will give you wisdom and I will give you everything else. So yeah, so again, we see the selflessness of a true leader.
Correct.
Very good.
King David blesses his son Solomon in Psalm 72 by telling him, may he judge your people with righteousness and your poor with justice. May he maintain peace through charity. There is this prayer, not for power, but for being altruist, to think of others.
Yeah. And the other thing, something my father always used to say, in the last few decades, we're constantly hearing about pursuing peace, right? The peace process. All we want is peace, right? The Torah doesn't say pursue peace. It says pursue justice. Justice brings peace. So it's justice that needs to be pursued. And so we see, especially in Israel, this elusive peace process that never seems to work. They're constantly pursuing peace. They're looking for negotiations. What do you want? This and that, and that. They're looking to make a deal instead of bringing justice to the situation and say, here's what it is, and then that's it. And justice, you will note, brings peace, whereas injustice in the hearts and minds of people brings violence. You see someone was killed and the murderer goes unpunished, you get angry, you get frustrated, and then you multiply that by thousands of murders going on. Eventually, everybody is in a violent mood, and this is what comes. But when you have justice, there's still the pain that someone was murdered, but you say, well, at least though it was justice, and justice was done, and God is the true judge, and that's that, and we can move on.
Yeah.
So
justice is one of the three pillars upon which the world rests. And if it is missing, the other two collapse.
Well, you all bring up great points, and the leadership that is shown by Bezalel and Oholiab was built on inspiration, not just authority. And they led by example, and they know how to make people feel valued, and not just for what they could contribute, but for who they are. Well, before we wrap up, there's one more aspect of this parasha I want to touch on, or we can't overlook. The Mishkan was something that the Israelites built together, but they didn't do it by force, as we've discussed, but everyone had the option to contribute what they could. And those who didn't contribute, were they forced to or not?
It doesn't sound that way, right? It sounds like the whole thing was voluntary.
Exactly. They weren't forced to. It was all about voluntary participation.
Whose ever heart was moved, free will offerings.
Yes.
And it reminds me of something I heard in a movie once, I forget which one, that nothing is stronger than the heart of a volunteer.
Oh,
and
excellent point, Sam.
Yeah,
so based off of that, I'm going to ask one final question. What do you think the Parasha is telling us about the importance of voluntary contribution versus being obligated to give? And how does this idea show up in our own communities, even our own synagogues?
Well, it's said that this is in the Kabbalah. It's stated that the gift that God gave to us when creating the world and the universe, it was a gift of himself. He gave of himself to us. And so what is Hashem? Well, Hashem is nothing if not generous. And so when we emulate Hashem, we elevate ourselves and we get a little bit closer to him. And so being generous and contributing willingly, as Hashem did, because Hashem didn't need to create this universe, right? I mean, he doesn't necessarily need anything. So why did he do it? Well, because you could say he needed to be generous, maybe, perhaps, but he was compelled to be generous and to show his generosity. And as the Kabbalah also states, in the spiritual world, there's no space. So closeness means when you resemble something. So when we become generous, like Hashem, we are resembling Hashem, we're getting close to him. So this is the main principle, I think.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Despite not being a Kabbalist, Maimonides actually brings that idea as well in the Sefer Mada. He lays out 10 rankings of angels, and then he says that because there is no space in heaven, when I say above and below, it's actually a metaphor for their level of knowledge of God.
Right. It's as many other things. The fancy word here, anthropomorphism, is when you take you need to explain an abstract concept, but you do it in a material way so that people can understand it. So above, below, closer, farther, these are things that we know of in the material world, but they don't really apply to a spiritual world, or they apply differently. So it's kind of an aid to help people understand.
And there was someone I want to share from the Gemara, that if I remember it correctly, talking about the Nadiv Lev, the generous heart. I think the sages say that one who just gives a poor person, some charity, he's blessed with 6 blessings. But one who does so with Nadiv Lev, also gives him comforting words, is blessed with 11 blessings. So
the highest level, I think.
So they give, they encourage that when you give, or really rather a true gift, is one that's given willingly and, with a generous heart.
That's awesome. Well, Sam, you know what time it is?
I think so.
It's that time.
It came too soon.
Thank you to everyone for your amazing thoughts and participation today. Parashat Vayakhel teaches us so much about community and leadership and the power of shared effort. It's a reminder that everyone's individual contribution matters, and when we all come together, we can create something truly special, just like the Mishkan. So thanks again for joining us this week, and we'll see you next time with more Torah insights. Until then, have a great week ahead. Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov. Thank you very much. A lot of good food for thought.
Yes.